Greetings everyone, I am IRSV. So, have you attempted the Geolab yet? If not, it can be found in this location by going through this cave from the beach. Today I wanted to focus a bit on some tips for the Geolabyrinth and just some things that I've noticed about it. While in group play, playing with a team combination of tech users seems to be a very good way of dealing with the Bujin at the end. Physical down feels really weak in certain parts of the Geolab. There are exceptions to this, but in a lot of cases, I feel like this statement reigns true. However, physical classes do have their niches. For example, gunners and fighters can give you much needed burst DPS on demand. Ultimately though, it does seem like going for a technique focused party seems to be a very strong way of clearing instants. And I've heard a lot of hunters and fighters say that the instants can be very brutal for them. However, those two classes also have something that the other classes cannot, which is the fact that they can take more hits because of overload and due to hunter's physique. Both of them allow them to take threatening damage and actually make use of the hit allowance counter. But to succeed in the Geolabyrinth, we need to establish some failure conditions. What actually defeats you in the Geolabyrinth if you're an experienced player and you're going for that solo, or you're an experienced group trying to get that good run done, or you're just trying to farm the S ranks? Well, here are two lose conditions for the runs as you are doing them. The first one being is battle of attrition. If you are fighting an enemy, regardless of how good you are, there is a time limit on you when you are fighting that enemy. Eventually, if that fight takes too long, you'll get to a point where, whether it be out of boredom or potentially just even fatigue of fighting the same thing over and over again, you will be in a position to make more mistakes. And the Geolab has very good techniques of actually causing this to happen. There are two multipliers that actually cause this to happen more than not as well. Them being the effect of turning an enemy into a Gigantics, which essentially doubles its health, and just increasing its HP naturally through the percentages. This means if you are fighting at the hardest difficulty, you can encounter a Branicle that has 10 times its normal HP pool. And if you get unlucky in that run, you could get enough of these types of enemies that have a high base health that are now multiplied insanely as malevolence, that you might even time out on top of this if you do not reach your attrition limit by then. Not to mention, if you are farming this over and over again, you can be in a situation where you just get tired and you start making more mistakes, the runs start going more poorly over time, and in my case, even getting pain in my hand because of a past injury. So I actually really do recommend taking breaks. The next lose condition is ambush. Now this is more of an issue in solo play, as in group play you can split up and make sure that enemies don't gank your allies while they're on 1 health because their health is draining at 20 points every 10 seconds. The other thing with this is that there are a lot of enemies that suddenly mean something to the run. All those fodder enemies that we used to one-shot, we may not know their movesets properly. And there are 2 new enemies in the instance, one being the Formzar enemy that was recycled from base game, and the Bujin at the end of the instance, which has a different moveset, both of which can catch you off guard and kill you. This knowledge issue you can actually train up by running the easier difficulty and just letting things hit you for a bit. Like, not actually letting it hit you, just watching what they do and learning what they do. Maybe even learning how to dodge and parry. And it might help your situational awareness in your proper runs. Next, I want to talk briefly about the Cuckoo weapon series. The Cuckoo weapon series is very valuable in this instance, even though the Gigantics are here. The reason for this is the Gigantics buff is just the 50% damage reduction that can be applied to these enemies. Not only does this mean that Cuckoo does more damage than Cinquium here, except maybe on the bosses which probably still have Gigantics level of armor, but Cuckoo is actually very strong here as it can cause you to survive hits that will otherwise kill you, even at the max difficulty. However, keep in mind that 2 of the random modifiers do affect your ability to hits and completely nullify Cuckoo's existence in terms of defense. So be wary of taking hits still, even if you do think that you can survive a hit. Bujin. There's really no way around the Bujin. Even if you are good at it, you may hit your battle of attrition limit quicker than you would any other enemy in the game thus far. The fight is very unforgiving and he will kill you if you are not careful. Though his moveset appears to be the same throughout all the Geolab levels, so you can practice on him at level 1. The main common roadblock of the run will be the level 3 though. There is a boss at the end of the instance and you can be fatigued at this point to the point that that boss will just kill you. And if you are running max health and malevolent, you can encounter a very high health malevolent enemy before the boss even starts. Meaning on this floor, you are fighting 2 bosses back to back essentially. So here especially, be very careful and try to stay alert. One way of dealing with the battle of attrition is having set functions to really wake yourself up mid-combat. And this has to be outside the game, as in some cases, these fights will take over 5 minutes to complete. Now, there are random rooms that appear, and they can have huge spikes in difficulty. There's one in particular at the very start of the instance that has potentially a really high point reward from what I can see of it, but is very difficult as there are a bunch of enemy that really are dangerous in that room. So what my group has resulted in doing is just resetting the run if we get that, as it is very much likely to kill all 4 of us repeatedly, and at that point we only have 1 revive each. Wasting our escape dolls on the first floor is not advisable, and honestly, if you are not confident about beating this floor, skip it. However, it is one of the most fun floors in the run and can really wake you up. Solo advice. I really do not recommend running solo with the randomizer C applied. There are 2 reasons for this. One, you only have 1 revive, so constantly being on 1 HP because of the debuff from randomizer C is just very difficult to deal with as a solo player. The second thing is that fighting a Gigantic's enemy, as I've brought up many times, can be really taxing. When I initially tried to solo this instant, I ran into a Malevolent Branicle that had 5 times HP. You'll notice that this is half of what I mentioned before. This was because I was doing it at an easier difficulty. And well, that Branicle absolutely destroyed me both times that I encountered it. And the reason for this is I had 1 health, had to avoid getting hit by all of the Branicle's attacks for upwards of 6 minutes if I was to actually kill it, and well, I just couldn't survive for that long. The Branicle attacks real quick and it's really easy to be caught off guard by it. So unfortunately, that was the end of both my runs on floor 3. So that is my main bit of advice for these runs. Do not run with randomizer C. And if even cutting your health in half is an issue, don't run with that randomizer either. Those 2 randomizers are probably the biggest issue for solo players, as your resources are incredibly limited in these runs. Here are some good S rank requirement combinations for beating the instance depending on what you are going for. I will not say much about them, so you will have to read the text on screen. I do want to say a couple of things about the Geolab though, and I do want to say that the instance can get incredibly difficult at times, but other parts are incredibly easy, and in fact incredibly easy to a point that it's boring. So if you're running this instance, make sure to have a bottle of water, maybe even some snacks with you, and just really have the ability to relax during those downtime segments. Really tune in once the action gets going again. The Geolab has both these extremes, and it is important to keep yourself paced with it. Otherwise, you will burn out and you will have issues going down the line. Also, because these are difficult instances and not all of us are good at dodging, be mindful of your health. Otherwise, I've been RSV, and I will see you next time.